The summons arrives before dawn. A soldier in the general's colors knocks on your forge door while the coals are still cold and your apprentice hasn't arrived yet. He doesn't speak much. He doesn't need to. He hands you a folded piece of parchment with a wax seal you recognize immediately, the garrison crest, and waits while you read it. The sword has been examined. You will present yourself at the garrison hall by mid-morning. Come alone. You read it twice. Then you set it down on your workbench and stare at the forge wall for a long moment. You already know what this is about. You'd noticed the fracture yourself 3 days after the sword left your hands. A customer brought in a blade for sharpening, and while you worked, your mind drifted back to General Aldric's commission, the rushed tempering, the deadline, the way you'd cooled the metal slightly faster than you should have. You'd told yourself it was fine. You'd told yourself the fracture, if there even was one, was too small to matter on a ceremonial piece. You were wrong. Now you walk through the garrison town in the gray early light, past the baker pulling bread from the oven, past the stable hands leading horses into the yard. Everyone is beginning their day. Yours feels like it's ending. The garrison hall is a stone building that smells of wood smoke and old authority. A steward leads you through a corridor and into a side chamber where General Aldric is already seated. He is a broad man, somewhere past 50, with the posture of someone who has never once in his life been told he was wrong. The sword lies on the table between you, flat on a cloth. Even from 3 feet away you can see the fracture, a thin, pale line near the guard, catching the morning light like an accusation. The general looks at you the way a man looks at something that has disappointed him. "Your work," he says. It isn't a question. You look at the sword, you look at him, and in the silence that follows, your mind moves in 3 directions at once. You could deny it, claim the fracture happened in his care, not yours. It's a lie, but it's a lie that might hold. You could confess fully, absorb the blame, and throw yourself on whatever mercy a general keeps. Or you could do something else entirely, something that turns this moment into a negotiation rather than a sentencing. The general hasn't spoken again. He's watching you. What would you do? You deny it. Not loudly, not with anger. You deny it the way a cornered man denies things, quietly, carefully, with just enough confidence to sound like you believe yourself. "General," you say, "that fracture didn't leave my forge." You tell him the blade was flawless at delivery. You suggest the fracture came from improper storage, a hard surface, a careless hand, perhaps the soldier who transported it. You keep your voice level. You keep your eyes on his. You say everything except the truth. The general's expression doesn't change. He studies you for a long moment, then dismisses you without another word. And for 3 days, you almost believe it worked. The weeks that follow feel almost normal. Your apprentice arrives each morning, the forge stays hot, small commissions come in, hinges, horseshoes, a merchant's knife. You don't hear from the garrison. You begin to breathe again. But the town is smaller than you think. The general's steward has a brother who drinks at the same tavern as your apprentice. Word moves the way water moves, finding every crack without announcing itself. Within a month, a version of the story is circulating in the market quarter. Not the full truth, something worse, a murmur. The blacksmith blamed the garrison for his own bad work. People don't know what to believe, which means they believe the worst. 2 merchants who had planned to commission work from you quietly take their business to a forge 2 towns over. You don't find out until you see one of them wearing a blade you didn't make. By the 2nd month, the garrison stops sending you work entirely. This matters more than you'd calculated. The garrison wasn't your biggest client, but it was your most reliable one. Shoe repairs, weapon maintenance, tool fabrication, steady, unglamorous work that kept the forge profitable through slow seasons. Without it, you're running on whatever the market quarter brings. It isn't enough. You take out a small loan to cover a supplier payment. You tell yourself it's temporary. By the third month, General Aldric makes his move. Not dramatically, not with soldiers at your door. He simply calls in a land note, a minor debt your father recorded against the forge property 15 years ago, long dormant, technically still valid. The garrison administers such records in this town. You hadn't thought about it in years. You have 30 days to pay a sum you don't have. You go to the moneylenders, you go to your brother-in-law, you go to every person you've ever done honest work for and ask for what you're owed in goodwill. Some of it comes back, not enough. On the final day of the 30th day, a garrison clerk arrives with papers. Your apprentice watches from the corner of the forge. Your wife stands in the doorway of the house connected to the property. Nobody speaks. You sign what you're told to sign. The forge still operates, for now, but the land it sits on belongs to the garrison. You are a tenant in your father's house. Every month you pay rent to the man you lie to. Every morning you light a fire in a forge that is no longer yours. The fracture in the sword was small. The fracture you created with one quiet lie was larger than you ever calculated. And the worst part, the part that stays with you through every cold morning after, is that General Aldric never once raised his voice. He didn't need to. He simply waited for the lie to do the work for him. You gave him the weapon. You just didn't realize you were handing it over.
Quick pause in the story. If you like these kinds of stories about life decisions and consequences, you might actually enjoy this channel. You can subscribe if you want to see more like this. All right, back to the story.
You confess, not theatrically, not with excuses layered underneath the admission like padding beneath a wound. You look at the sword, then at the general, and you tell him the truth in plain language. The fault is mine. I rushed the tempering to meet your deadline. I should have told you the piece needed more time. I didn't. That fracture came from my forge. The silence that follows is the longest of your life. General Aldric doesn't move. He looks at you with an expression you can't fully read, somewhere between contempt and something that might distantly be respect. He picks up the sword, turns it once in his hands, then sets it back down. You'll reforge it, he says, at no charge, and you'll have it done in 2 weeks. That's all. You're dismissed. The 2 weeks that follow nearly break you. A replacement sword of this quality normally takes 4. You work before sunrise and past midnight. Your apprentice runs the bellows until his arms give out. You source better steel than you used the first time, partly out of professional pride, partly because you understand that this blade needs to be beyond criticism. You eat less. You sleep in the forge twice rather than walk home. Your wife brings meals to the anvil without comment. She understands, in the way people who love practical people understand things, that this is what the situation requires. The sword is finished in 13 days. When you deliver it, the general examines it for a long time. He holds it at different angles in the light. He checks the balance, runs a thumb along the flat of the blade, examines the guard and the grip. You stand and wait and say nothing. Finally, he nods, not warmly, but definitively. This is acceptable work, he says. You go home, you sleep for 11 hours. The months that follow are neither reward nor punishment. They are simply continuation. The garrison resumes sending you maintenance work. Not more than before, not less. The town's opinion of you settles somewhere around the blacksmith who made a mistake and fixed it, which in a working-class market quarter is about as good a reputation as a tradesman can realistically hold. People respect competence. They respect accountability slightly more, but they don't celebrate it. They simply factor it in. The land debt remains. You pay it down slowly, the way your father was paying it down before you, one season at a time, one commission at a time. Progress is real, but it is slow. There are months when the numbers feel impossible and months when they feel manageable. You learn to tell the difference and not confuse one for the other. What you don't expect is the referral. 8 months after the sword is redelivered, a merchant captain passing through the garrison town asks General Aldric who made the ceremonial blade hanging in the hall. The general gives your name. He doesn't embellish. He doesn't recommend you warmly. He simply says your name and your location, which in this world is recommendation enough coming from a garrison commander. The merchant captain needs 12 matched blades for a private security contract. The commission is the largest you've ever received. You didn't earn it through brilliance. You earn it through the one moment you told the truth when lying would have been easier. The forge stays yours. The land debt gets cleared 2 years later than you'd hoped. There is no dramatic mourning, no celebration. You pay the final note, receive a stamped receipt from a garrison clerk, and walk home through the same market quarter you've walked through 1,000 times. Your apprentice is good enough now that you're considering taking on a second. Your father's name is still above the door. Nothing about this path was comfortable. The confession cost you sleep, money, and weeks of brutal work, but it didn't cost you the thing you were most afraid of losing. Sometimes, survival doesn't look like winning. It looks like still being standing when the dust settles, and you are still standing.
You don't confess, you don't deny, you negotiate. Before the general can speak again, you take one step toward the table, look directly at the sword, and say something he isn't expecting. I see it. I know where it came from, and I can tell you exactly why it happened. You don't apologize, you don't deflect. You speak like a craftsman who understands his own failure with enough precision to be useful, which is a different thing entirely from simply admitting fault. You tell him the fracture came from accelerated cooling during the final tempering phase. You tell him it was a deadline decision, not a skill failure. You tell him you can reforge the blade, but more importantly, you tell him you've identified something in the process that most blacksmiths in this region wouldn't catch, because most blacksmiths in this region are working with older methods. Then you say the part that makes the room shift. Your garrison has 14 other blades I've worked on in the past 2 years. If this one has a fracture from rush tempering, some of those may have similar weaknesses. You won't see them until a blade fails under pressure. I can inspect every one of them, find the problems before they become battlefield problems, and reforge this sword at no charge. In exchange, I need the land note against my property cleared. The general looks at you for a long time. You have just turned a sentencing into a proposal. You have made his problem larger and then immediately offered to be the solution. It is the most dangerous thing you've ever said out loud. He doesn't answer immediately. He dismisses you and tells you to return the following morning. You walk home not knowing whether you'll be met with an agreement or a garrison soldier. You don't sleep. Your wife reads your face and doesn't ask questions. You sit by the forge until the coals go dark. In the morning, the steward meets you at the garrison gate. The general has agreed, with conditions. You will inspect all 14 blades within 3 weeks. You will reforge the ceremonial sword first, within 10 days. The land note will be cleared only after all work is completed and approved. If any inspection is found to be incomplete or dishonest, the agreement is void and the original matter returns to the general's discretion. It is not a generous offer. It is a controlled one. He has taken your gambit and structured it entirely on his terms. You accept. The 3 weeks that follow are the hardest of your professional life. Reforging the ceremonial sword while simultaneously inspecting 14 garrison blades means your forge runs at capacity from before dawn until after dark every single day. Your apprentice works beside you without complaint, partly out of loyalty, partly because he understands something significant is happening. You find 3 other blades with minor structural concerns during the inspections. You report all 3 honestly, which costs you additional uncompensated labor, but earns you something harder to manufacture: credibility inside the garrison walls. The general receives your written inspection report personally. He reads it in front of you without expression. The land note is cleared on a Thursday morning in early autumn. A clerk delivers the stamped document to the forge without ceremony. You read it twice, set it on the workbench beside your father's old tongs, and go back to work because there is work to do. But something is changed that no document fully captures. Inside the garrison, your name now means something different than it did before. You are not simply the blacksmith in the market quarter. You are the blacksmith who identified a systemic problem, proposed a solution, and delivered it completely. The general doesn't become your ally. He is not that kind of man, and you are not that kind of client. But he becomes something more valuable in a garrison town, a source of referrals who respects competence expressed through action rather than words. Over the following year, 3 junior officers commissioned personal blades from you. Not because the general told you to, because they heard the story, the real one, not the rumor, of the blacksmith who walked into a very bad situation and walked out having solved it. Your apprentice stays. Your forge expands by 1 room. The risk nearly broke you. The inspection work was brutal, and the outcome was never guaranteed. There were 3 days during the 2nd week when you genuinely didn't know if the general would honor the agreement or simply use your completed work as leverage for something worse. That uncertainty never fully disappeared. You simply kept working through it. The fracture in the sword was a failure. What you built from that failure was something your father's methods never quite produced. A reputation not just for craft, but for how you behave when the craft goes wrong. In a world run by powerful men, that distinction is sometimes the only protection a working man has.
3 paths. 1 fractured sword. 1 family home. And what sits between those things, what has always sat between them, is a single moment in a stone chamber where a powerful man looked at you and waited to see what you were made of. Not what your forge was made of, not your steel, not your tempering process, not the quality of your father's tools, you. The lie felt like protection. It had the shape of survival, quick, clean, requiring nothing from you except the willingness to hold a false position under pressure. And for 3 days it worked, the way a bad weld holds until you put weight on it. What you didn't calculate, what the lie never tells you when it offers itself, is that powerful men don't always argue with you in the room. Sometimes they simply wait outside it. They have time you don't have, resources you don't have, patience you can't afford to match. The lie didn't protect you. It handed General Aldric a version of events where you were already guilty of something worse than a fracture, and then it made you pay rent on your own legacy. The confession felt like surrender. Walking into that hall and offering the truth without knowing what it would cost, that required something the lie didn't. Not courage exactly, something quieter than courage. A decision that the thing you were protecting was worth protecting honestly, or not worth protecting at all. The confession cost you 2 weeks of brutal work and months of slow recovery. What it didn't cost you was the forge. What it gave you, quietly, without announcement, was a merchant captain's referral 8 months later, a commission that came not from your best work, but from your worst moment handled with integrity. The world doesn't always reward honesty, but sometimes it remembers it. The negotiation felt like gambling, because it was. You took a moment of maximum vulnerability and tried to reshape it into leverage, not by hiding the fracture, but by expanding the problem large enough that you became the most qualified person in the room to solve it. It worked. Not cleanly, not safely. There were days inside those 3 weeks when the agreement felt like a trap, and the trap felt like your own design. But what the negotiation produced wasn't just a cleared land note. It produced a version of yourself that knew, had proven under real pressure, that you could think inside a crisis rather than simply react to one. That knowledge doesn't leave you. It sits in the forge beside the tools. It changes what you're willing to attempt next time. And there will always be a next time. That is perhaps the most honest thing this story offers. Not that one choice is correct, not that honesty always wins, or that strategy always pays, or that the impulsive path always destroys, but that every choice you make under pressure, every fracture you cause, and every way you respond to it is quietly building the person who will face the next fracture. The sword General Aldric commissioned was always secondary. The real thing being forged in that chamber, in every version of that story, was you. Some cracks appear in steel. Some appear in the stories we tell about ourselves when we're cornered. The question worth sitting with, long after this forge goes cold, isn't which choice was right. It's which version of yourself you could live with. That's the ripple that never stops moving.
Every choice creates a ripple, some small, some life-changing. If you enjoy stories like this, subscribe to Cause and Ripple for more stories about life, decisions, and consequences. And I'll see you in the next story.